At my wife's funeral, while the lilies were still fresh and the pastor was still speaking, my own son leaned in and whispered, "You're dead to us, too." In that moment, standing over my wife's coffin, something inside me didn't break. It awakened, because the only thing more dangerous than a grieving man is a man who finally sees the truth. If you stay with me, you'll witness how my wife's last wish exposed a conspiracy and led to a reckoning none of them saw coming. At my wife's funeral, the scent of lilies pressed into the air so thick, it felt like it was sitting directly on my chest, heavy and sweet and wrong in a way I couldn't fully explain. Because lilies were supposed to symbolize peace, renewal, the gentle closing of a life well lived. Yet nothing about that moment felt gentle. I stood inches from Margaret's coffin, staring at the polished oak she had chosen long before either of us imagined she would need it, and I thought about how strange it was that a man could spend 45 years sharing coffee, arguments, grocery lists, whispered prayers, shared secrets, and quiet evenings with a woman only to end up talking to a box he couldn't open. Colored light from the stained glass windows washed across her still face, blues and golds dancing over the features I had memorized long before age softened them, and I swear for a moment I could almost hear her voice saying the things she always said about church light. "Look, Luther, the sun is visiting us today, except today the sun wasn't visiting me. It was visiting her, and I was left standing behind in a world I didn't feel built for anymore." The pastor spoke in a soft, practiced voice about Margaret's kindness, her service, her faith. But what he didn't say, what no one else could have known, was how much of my life she held together quietly, how she steadied my temper, how she softened my edges, how she believed in me even on the days I didn't deserve it. I listened because I had to, but my eyes kept drifting past him, to the back of the church, where my son Aaron and his wife Brianna stood like two people who had wandered into the wrong room and were pretending to belong. Aaron looked exhausted in a way I had never seen, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, eyes refusing to land on me. But Brianna, she looked irritated, like grief was an inconvenience she hadn't scheduled for. Her black dress fit perfectly, her makeup immaculate, but her eyes were flat and cold, scanning the room with a sharpness that didn't belong at a funeral. Every few minutes, she leaned toward Aaron, whispering something that made his expression harden further. It was the same look he'd worn for years now. The look of a man who had forgotten how to think for himself because someone else was whispering his thoughts for him. When the service ended and the last note of the hymn faded, people lined up to hug me, to squeeze my hand, to murmur cliches like, "She's in a better place." And I nodded the way grieving people do because they're too tired to correct anyone. But even as neighbors and church friends embraced me, I watched Aaron and Brianna hanging back, their body language stiff, impatient, like they were waiting for a meeting to start. When the final mourner drifted out of the double doors, Brianna's heels clicked their way up the aisle with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no used on her. She didn't offer condolences. She didn't mention Margaret's name. Instead, she said, "We need to talk about the arrangements, Luther. The house, the accounts. There are decisions to be made, and we should handle them quickly while everything is still fresh." Fresh. She said it like my wife's death was a chore with a deadline. I looked at Aaron, hoping, praying he would say something, anything, to slow her down, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Aaron," I said quietly, trying to reach the boy I raised inside the man standing before me. "Can we talk privately, just the two of us?" His answer hit harder than cancer, harder than death, harder than anything life had ever thrown at me. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Brianna. She's family." Family. That word twisted in my chest, like somebody gripping my heart from the inside. Margaret and I had built our family with our bare hands, through sacrifices and sleepless nights and years of doing our best. Now my son was telling me I no longer belonged to the family I created. Brianna placed her hand on his arm, the gentlest, most calculated leash I'd ever seen, and gave him a look I recognized without understanding fully until that moment. A command, a nudge, a silent instruction from a puppeteer. Aaron straightened, drew in a slow breath, and said the sentence that cracked the floor under my feet. "Mom's gone now, Dad. And honestly, you're dead to us too." The room went silent. Not the respectful silence of a church, but the stunned silence of people watching a slow-motion car crash they can't look away from. Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "Lord have mercy," under their breath, but I didn't break. 40 years of running a contracting business, of arguing with inspectors, and negotiating with stubborn clients, had taught me exactly how to hold myself steady when the ground shifts suddenly, so I didn't collapse. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. I let the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable, long enough for the weight of his words to become real even to him. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out Margaret's old leather wallet. She had pressed it into my hand 2 weeks before she died. Her voice frail but her grip surprisingly strong. "Luther," she whispered, "when they betray you, and they will use what's inside." I hadn't understood. I do now. Slowly, I slid out the small, heavy silver card hidden in the wallet. Legacy Access, First National Bank. The engraving caught the stained glass light like a blade. "If that's how you feel," I said, my voice low but steady, "then let me show you your mother's last wish." For the first time since she walked up the aisle, Brianna's mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned forward, trying to get a better look, trying to calculate what she didn't know. Predators fear unknown variables. This card, this thing Margaret kept hidden for 30 years, was something she hadn't planned for, and something in the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Then, I saw her, a woman I didn't recognize, standing off to the side, silver-streaked hair pulled back. Eyes locked on us, not with curiosity but recognition. She gave me a tiny nod, small, controlled, like someone confirming a long-expected moment, and then looked away. I would learn her name later. I would learn why she was there, and I would learn she held the missing piece of a story Margaret had started building long before any of us realized we were living inside it. But in that moment, all I knew was this. Something Margaret left behind was about to ignite, and the people who thought they could bury me with my wife had no idea what kind of reckoning they had just walked into. If you're ready for part 2, type "Justice for Margaret" in the comments right now, because everything that comes next hits harder than the funeral itself. I didn't sleep the night after the funeral. I sat in the living room Margaret decorated 30 years ago, surrounded by the quiet hum of a house that suddenly felt too large for my grief, too empty for the life I had once lived inside it. Every picture frame, every piece of furniture, every folded blanket held a memory of her hands. Hands that had guided this home, steadied my life, covered my failings more times than I deserved, and now those hands were gone, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt like an extra presence in the room. I replayed Aaron's words over and over, not because I didn't understand them, but because I couldn't reconcile them with the boy I raised. "You're dead to us too." The sentence echoed inside me like a hollow knock on a casket lid. Yet, what kept returning to my mind again and again was not the sentence itself, but the look in his eyes when he said it. A look that didn't belong to him, a look that belonged to someone who had been trained, coached, guided into cruelty, and I knew exactly whose hand had been on the steering wheel. But every time I tried to let anger take over, something else blocked it. Margaret's face, or rather, the memory of that hospital night 2 weeks before she died, the night she handed me the silver Legacy Access card and whispered the words that now pulsed like prophecy. "When they betray you, and they will use this." She didn't say if. She said when. She had seen something long before I allowed myself to see it. And now the question that gnawed at me was, What exactly had she prepared for? What storm had she felt coming? Because Margaret was not a woman who worried without reason. If she left a secret, it was because she expected it to be needed. As the grandfather clock ticked steadily toward morning, her final whisper from that hospital bed resurfaced with unnerving clarity. The neighbor, Nora, she'll understand. But I didn't know any neighbor named Nora. I'd lived in this house for decades. I knew who lived on either side, who mowed their lawns, who kept their porch lights on at night. Yet Margaret had spoken her name with certainty, as if this woman, this stranger, was somehow tied into a plan I hadn't known existed. At sunrise, with my mind still foggy from a night without rest, I stepped outside to get the morning paper more out of habit than desire. The air was cool, the kind of cool Texas mornings get just before they remember they're supposed to be hot. As I turned back toward the house, I saw movement next door. A woman was kneeling in her garden, silver-streaked hair pulled back, hands wearing gardening gloves, as she tended to a row of young plants. She looked up. Our eyes met. Recognition flashed in her expression, the same unsettling, knowing recognition I saw in the church. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply stood, removed one glove, and waited, as though she expected me, as though she knew I would approach. And without fully understanding why, I walked toward the fence that separated our properties. "Mr. Grant," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying a weight I couldn't place. "I'm Nora Williams. I moved in about a year and a half ago, though. I don't think we've ever spoken." Her name hit me like a jolt. Nora, the neighbor Margaret whispered about while drifting between life and death. "My wife," I said, swallowing around the lump in my throat, "mentioned you. Before she passed." Something flickered across her face, pain mixed with a kind of solemn recognition. "She told me you might need someone to talk to," Nora said. "Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon." Her words weren't casual. They weren't the sort of polite condolence a neighbor gives. They sounded like instructions she'd been waiting to deliver. "Did you know Margaret?" I asked. She took a slow breath, as if sorting through which truth to reveal. "We spoke. A few times," she said. "She was kind. And she understood things most people overlook." I wanted to ask her what that meant, but before I could, she added, "I'm very sorry for your loss." There was an intensity in her voice, a sincerity that settled uncomfortably deep. "Thank you," I said quietly. "If you ever need anything," she said, "even just someone to sit with in silence, I'm right next door." Then she stepped back, pulled on her glove, and returned to her garden as though she had not just stepped into the center of a secret my wife left behind. I stood there long after she resumed working, trying to make sense of the feeling crawling its way up my spine. A stranger shouldn't be connected to my wife's final instructions. But she was. And whether I understood it or not, Margaret had trusted her enough to leave her as part of whatever plan she built. I spent the rest of the day drifting through the house, not quite functioning but not entirely numb. Grief does that to a man. It puts him in a limbo state where nothing feels real but everything hurts anyway. I touched Margaret's pillow, still faintly scented with lavender. I opened drawers she organized. I stared at the photo from our 30th anniversary, where her smile made me believe we could survive anything. But by evening, grief had given way to something sharper, a need for answers. Margaret's wallet sat on the table, the silver legacy card glinting under the kitchen light. "Everything you need is there," she had said. "When they betray you." And betrayal had already happened. So at 9 o'clock the next morning, I drove to First National Bank. I arrived early, too early, because exhaustion and anxiety have a way of pushing a man into unnecessary punctuality. The building was tall, cold-looking, made of limestone and glass that reflected the sky like a shield. Inside, everything was clean lines and polished floors. I approached the teller and placed the silver card on the counter. "I need to access this account," I said. The teller, A young woman who looked barely old enough to vote picked it up, turned it over, and frowned. "Sir, I've never seen a card like this. It's from 1994, I said. "My wife opened it 30 years ago." Her expression shifted toward confusion, then apology, then dismissal. "This doesn't match any of our systems anymore," she said. "I'm not sure. Is there a problem?" a calm voice said from behind me. I turned. A woman in a navy suit stood there, mid-40s, sharp eyes, confident posture. Her name tag read, Olivia Ward, branch manager. The teller repeated her concern. Olivia took the card, and the moment she saw the engraving, her entire demeanor changed. Respect, recognition, something close to awe. "Sir," she said quietly, "please come with me." She led me through a hallway into a private office, closed the door, and sat across from me. "Mr. Grant," she said, "do you know what this card represents?" "My wife didn't explain," I replied. "She just said it was important." Olivia exhaled slowly. "This is a Founder's Legacy Access card. Only 12 were ever issued. Your wife invested in a technology startup through our early expansion program. That startup became one of the largest tech corporations in the world." Her fingers typed rapidly across the keyboard. She paused, looked at the screen, looked at me. "Mr. Grant, the current value of your wife's account is approximately $2.3 million. The room tilted. I gripped the arm of the chair. Margaret coupon cutting, modest living. Lights off in any empty room. Margaret had been quietly sitting on a fortune for decades and never touched it once. "There's more," Olivia added gently. "This card also grants access to a safety deposit box." She led me downstairs into the vault. Inside the box were 2 items. A thick legal document labeled Grant Family Living Trust, and a sealed beige folder marked in Margaret's handwriting. "Private investigation for Luther open when they betray you." My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I took both items to a private booth. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The first page wasn't written by Margaret. It was a formal letter from a private investigator in Phoenix. "Mrs. Grant," it read, "your suspicions were correct. Subject has done this before. Please see attached report regarding the death of Victor Reyes, Phoenix, 2019. I stared at the words, unable to breathe. Done this before. Death. Suspicions correct. And in that moment, something inside me, the part still clinging to disbelief, still hoping Brianna was just misguided or controlling, finally cracked open to the truth. My wife had been preparing me for a war long before I ever realized someone had declared one. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just disrespect at a funeral. It was bigger, darker, and built on a pattern that had already left one man dead. And this was only page 1. If you're ready for part 3, type expose them in the comments so we continue this reckoning. I didn't open the rest of the investigation file right away. Not because I didn't want answers, but because a part of me already knew that whatever lay inside those pages was going to change everything I thought I understood about my son's wife, about my family, and even about the last few years of Margaret's life. I sat there in the small private room inside the bank vault, the walls cold and silent around me, the same way my house had felt since Margaret passed. The words, "Done this before," kept repeating in my mind like a drumbeat I couldn't silence. My wife hadn't stumbled onto a suspicion. She had uncovered a pattern, one that was dangerous enough that she spent the final years of her life preparing for a threat she couldn't physically fight anymore. And what unsettled me most wasn't just what Brianna might have done in Phoenix. It was that Margaret believed with enough certainty to put it in writing that this woman wasn't finished, that she had merely changed locations and upgraded her target. When I finally forced myself to read the next page, the world around me narrowed to a tunnel. The file documented the story of a 8-year-old widower named Victor Reyes, a man who had lost his wife to cancer and attended a grief support group at a Catholic church in Phoenix, and that was where he met a young woman who introduced herself as Brianna Morrison. I kept reading, my eyes skimming through the investigator's notes, the bank statements, the timeline of events that felt too familiar, too deliberate. She befriended him quickly. She cooked meals for him, organized his medications, helped him clean his home. She spoke softly. She listened. She offered sympathy that felt like oxygen to a man drowning in loneliness. And then, the file shifted to the financial section. It listed every dollar Victor transferred to her, small amounts at first groceries, car repairs, emergencies, then larger amounts, $5,000, $10,000, $40,000, until finally, the investigator had highlighted in red the final line, $340,000 transferred to accounts under the control of subject Morrison 3 months before victim was found deceased. I closed my eyes. My hands clenched around the pages. This was no coincidence. This was no misunderstanding. This was a method, a pattern, a system of predation disguised as love, built on isolating a man at his weakest moment and draining him until he had nothing left. And now that same woman had married my son, lived under my roof, sat at my dinner table, smiled at my wife. The next page was a news clipping about Victor's death. Official ruling: suicide by overdose. But the investigator had circled a paragraph where Victor's sister insisted her brother would never have taken his own life. He was Catholic. He believed suicide was an unforgivable sin. She suspected foul play. She filed a civil suit, but the case never reached trial. Brianna settled privately and disappeared. New name, new state, new target. My pulse hammered in my ears. I ran a hand over my face, trying to steady myself. But the file wasn't finished with me. The final page was a handwritten note from Margaret, her handwriting the soft, looping cursive I had seen on grocery lists, birthday cards, little notes she used to slip into my lunchbox when we were newly married. "Luther," she wrote, "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I discovered this 2 years ago, when something Brianna said at dinner made me suspicious. I hired a professional to confirm everything, and what he found terrified me. I wanted to protect you, and I wanted to protect Aaron. He is trapped in something he can't see, married to a woman who sees him as nothing more than a means to an end. Use this information carefully. Don't act in anger. And find Nora Williams. She knows more than you think. Margaret." My breath left me. All those dinners where Brianna smiled politely at Margaret while subtly guiding conversations away from anything personal. All those moments when Aaron seemed distant, strangely defensive anytime his mother asked too many questions. All those holidays Brianna insisted they couldn't attend. Everything that had felt slightly off suddenly snapped into place like puzzle pieces that had been scattered for years. Margaret had been watching. Margaret had suspected. Margaret had fought for me, for Aaron, for our family while battling cancer, and she hadn't told me because she knew I would confront Brianna immediately. She knew direct confrontation would tip Brianna off and send her underground. She knew that to defeat someone like this, you needed more than anger. You needed evidence, a plan, allies, strength she no longer had physically, but she gave me through preparation. I folded the file slowly, reverently, as though I were handling her last breath. Then, I picked up the living trust document. The first page made my heart stutter. Margaret had transferred every asset we owned: house, investments, savings, into a revocable trust. All of it under my control as the sole trustee. That meant no one, not even Aaron, had legal access to anything as long as I was alive and competent. And competency was something Brianna was already trying to attack. The second page held another note from Margaret. "If they try to declare you incompetent, the trust transfers to a neutral fiduciary, not to family, not to her, They cannot touch it. Not now. Not ever. I sank back in the chair, staring at the floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this woman had done for me. While dying, she built a fortress around our lives, brick by brick, and she left me the blueprint. When I finally stepped out of the bank, the sunlight felt different, brighter, sharper, more revealing. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. I was a man carrying the truth my wife had died preparing me for, and there was still one instruction left undone. Find Nora. When I returned home, I saw her again. Nora Williams, standing in her garden, tending the soil with slow, deliberate movements, like she was waiting for something to grow. Or waiting for me. She looked up. This time, she didn't wait for me to approach. She walked toward the fence with a calmness that made my heartbeat accelerate. "You read it," she said, not as a question, but as a certainty. I nodded. "How long have you known?" Her eyes softened with something deeper than pity. "Since the day your wife knocked on my door in Phoenix." My breath caught. Phoenix, where Victor Reyes lived, where he died. "Your wife found me," Nora said quietly. "She told me everything. She asked for my help, and I gave it." The world tilted beneath me. Why? Her answer was simple, devastating, and carried a weight that settled into my bones. Because Victor Reyes was my brother. And in that moment, everything Margaret's whisper, Nora's watchful eyes, her presence at the funeral locked into place with terrifying clarity. I gripped the fence, steadying myself as the truth hit with full force. I wasn't just fighting for my own life. I was stepping into a battle that began long before Brianna married my son. And now I had an ally who had been waiting 18 months for this moment. If you're ready for part 4, type "I'm still here" in the comments, because the next piece of this story is where the real war begins. I stood there gripping the fence like it was the only thing keeping me upright, while Nora's words echoed in my ears, her calm, steady voice saying, "Victor Reyes was my brother," with a quiet finality that cut deeper than any shout could have. It felt like the world had shifted under my feet. Not violently, but in that slow, deliberate way a house settles at night, where everything seems stable until you realize the entire frame has moved an inch without you noticing. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman who knelt tending to tomato plants in her garden with the sister of a man whose death had been quietly written off and buried beneath a settlement agreement. She watched me with patient eyes, studying the storm building behind mine, waiting for me to find my footing. "Margaret told me everything she found," Nora said, her voice low but steady, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "And she showed me the mistakes I made with my brother. She said she didn't want you or your son to fall into the same trap." I felt something inside me twist: pain, guilt, a sharp flare of grief. But underneath all of that was a growing heat, the kind that comes from realizing someone you love has been fighting a battle alone so you wouldn't have to. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, though I already knew. Nora took a long breath and looked at me with a softness that held no pity, just understanding. "She told me you're a good man. But she also said you're a man who leads with his heart. And if she told you too soon, she worried you'd confront Brianna without proof, and that would put you in danger." She paused for a moment, letting that settle, and it would have tipped her off. Hearing someone else say it carved a cold pit into my stomach. "So she kept it to herself," I whispered, more to the wind than to Nora. "She carried all that alone while she was dying." "Not alone," Nora corrected gently. "She had me. She had the investigator. And she had a plan." The word plan rekindled something in me. A spark, faint but undeniable. I motioned toward the fence. "Can we talk inside?" She nodded, removed her gloves, wiped her hands, and followed me into my house. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel empty. It felt watchful, Like the walls themselves had been waiting for the truth to arrive. Nora stepped into the living room and looked around, her eyes lingering on the photographs Margaret hung with such care. She moved slowly, like she was entering a sacred space, not wanting to disturb the air that still felt thick with my wife's absence. When she finally spoke, it was with that same measured calm. "Victor was a quiet man," she began. "Gentle, private. After his wife died, he didn't know how to function in a world without her. He was vulnerable in ways he didn't even understand, and that woman saw it. She targeted him. Step by step, she isolated him, manipulated him, made him believe she was the only one who cared. And by the time he realized something was wrong, it was too late." Her eyes clouded with memories so raw, I almost felt like I was intruding just by listening. "When I tried to intervene," she continued, "he pushed me away. He said I was jealous, controlling. He said she loved him." Those words hit me hard, because I had heard my own son use variations of them whenever Brianna tightened her hold on him after he died. Nora said, her voice tightening. "I tried to push the police to reopen the case, but without hard evidence, there was nothing they would do. And then, she vanished, moved states, married your son. And I thought the trail was dead until the day Margaret knocked on my door in Phoenix." I leaned forward, hands clasped. "What did she say to you?" Nora smiled, not the kind of smile that comes from amusement, but the kind that comes from remembering someone you respect deeply. She said, "I know who took your brother from you, and she's trying to take my family next. Help me stop her." My chest tightened. Of course, Margaret didn't confront Brianna directly. She built alliances quietly, intelligently, strategically. She was protecting us in ways I never realized. "She told me about the trust," Nora continued. "She told me about the account. She told me about the signs she had seen in your son. The sudden defensiveness, the secrecy, the new spending patterns, the emotional distance, all things she recognized because she had studied what happened to my brother." Something inside me hardened. I thought of all the times Aaron brushed off my concerns, all the times he defended Brianna like a man afraid of losing his oxygen source. "My son isn't a bad man," I said quietly. "No. And men who are trapped don't recognize cages when the bars are painted gold." That line hit me with the precision of a hammer striking a nail. She walked to the window and looked out toward her garden, arms crossed loosely as though grounding herself before telling me the next piece. "Margaret asked me to watch from a distance," she said, "not to interfere unless you opened the folder. She wanted you to come to the truth in your own time so that when the moment came to act, you wouldn't be driven by panic or grief." Margaret had always been smarter than me in the ways that mattered most. She could see patterns I missed. She could anticipate danger I didn't recognize. And even now, she was guiding me through a storm she knew she wouldn't survive. "So, what now?" I asked. "What do we do with all of this?" Nora turned back to me and held my gaze with a steadiness that calmed something inside my chest. "Now," she said, "we push back. Carefully, quietly, strategically, the way your wife intended." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather notebook. "This contains everything Margaret and I documented: timelines, behavioral patterns, financial red flags, psychological tactics Brianna used on Victor and may now be using on your son, and a plan Margaret developed for the day you finally discovered the truth." I took the notebook with hands that weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. The cover was worn, the pages filled with Margaret's handwriting intertwined with Nora's, two women who had never been friends in the traditional sense but had built a quiet alliance across state lines to protect the men they loved. "Your wife was extraordinary," Nora said, her voice softening. "She fought for you until her last breath." I swallowed hard, because grief and pride and rage and love were all surging inside me at once. "There's one more thing," she added, "something Margaret wanted me to give you only after you read the file." She opened her bag again and pulled out a USB drive. Simple, silver, unmarked. "What's on it?" I asked. Nora didn't look away. "Recordings," she said. "Conversations your wife captured. Ones between Aaron and Brianna. Ones that prove manipulation, coercion, and emotional control. And one more, a recording that ties Brianna to your son's sudden push to have you declared incompetent. Margaret suspected they were trying to remove you as an obstacle so they could access your assets once she passed." The room felt colder. "How did she even get these recordings?" I asked. Nora's answer knocked the breath out of me. "Your wife knew she was dying," she said gently. "So she learned how to protect you. She learned how to record conversations without being noticed. She learned how to gather evidence without raising suspicion. She learned everything she needed because she refused to leave you defenseless." I closed my eyes. My throat burned. I could almost hear her voice again. "When they betray you, use what's inside." And I finally understood the weight of her words. Margaret hadn't left me a file. She had left me a weapon. "So," Nora said, her voice steady, "the only question left is whether you're ready to use it." And in that moment, standing in the home my wife built and protected until her final breath, I felt something inside me solidify. Not anger, not fear, resolve. Quiet, sharp, unshakable. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." If you're ready for part 5, type "I won't be silenced" in the comments. Because what comes next is where the trap starts to close, just not on the man they expected. The moment Nora placed that USB drive in my hand, everything inside me shifted, not in a dramatic way, but in that steady, irreversible way. A river quietly changes course after years of pressure building behind a hidden wall. I didn't even open the files yet. Just feeling the weight of it between my fingers was enough to make my pulse thicken. It was one thing to suspect manipulation. It was another thing entirely to hold proof, the kind of proof that could crack open the facade Brianna built and expose the machinery beneath. Nora watched me closely. Not intrusively, but like someone who understood the importance of this exact moment in a man's life. The moment when fear stops being fear and becomes purpose. "There's something you need to understand," she said quietly. "These types of people, they don't react like regular people when they feel cornered. They become more charming, more vicious, more persuasive, more dangerous. That's why Margaret moved slowly. That's why she documented everything. You cannot let her know you're aware of any of this." The irony wasn't lost on me, that a dying woman had more clarity and strategic foresight than her fully alive husband. I nodded slowly, gripping the drive in my palm like a lifeline. "Where do we start?" I asked, my voice lower than usual, because I already sensed that once we stepped onto this path, there would be no turning back. Nora didn't hesitate. She opened the notebook Margaret helped her compile and flipped to a section labeled Timeline, Aaron and Brianna. The entries were brutal in their precision. Dates, conversations, abrupt shifts in Aaron's behavior, sudden financial pressure, controlled access to friends, emotional withdrawal, unexplained disappearances during holidays, patterns repeated almost identically to the Phoenix case. Seeing it like that, all written out, all documented by two women who were fighting silently for men who never realized they were already under attack, it made something inside me ignite, with a heat that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with awakening. "She was conditioning him," Nora said, pointing to a set of dates, 3 months after Aaron married her. "This is exactly when Victor began pulling away from me. Notice the similarities: isolation, defensive responses, shifts in spending control, messaging that makes him believe you don't understand him." A heaviness sank into my chest. Aaron wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He wasn't malicious. He was drowning and didn't know it. "If we approach him now," Nora continued, "he'll defend her. He'll protect her. He'll believe you're the threat, not her." I swallowed hard because I knew she was right. I could already hear his voice saying, "Dad, you're being dramatic," or "You're misjudging her," or "Why do you hate my wife?" But then Nora added something that steadied me. "The recordings will be the turning point," she said, "but only when the time is right. If he hears them too soon, he'll reject them. That's what trauma-bonded individuals do. They cling to the abuser because the truth threatens the entire emotional structure they're surviving inside." I knew nothing about trauma bonding. I knew nothing about psychological manipulation. But I knew construction. I knew foundations. And what Nora described sounded exactly like a house built on faulty support beams, beautiful from the outside, but one good storm away from total collapse. "The storm is coming for her," I said quietly. "Oh, it is," Nora replied, "but we choose when." She closed the notebook. "Tonight, you're going to go home, rest, and say nothing to anyone. Act normal. Let them believe you're still grieving and distracted. The more they underestimate you, the safer you are." I nodded, though my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from anticipation, because for the first time since my wife died, I didn't feel like a man being dragged by grief. I felt like a man moving towards something with intention. When Nora left and the house grew quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table with the USB drive in front of me like an artifact. Margaret's handwriting flashed in my mind. "When they betray you, use what's inside." I plugged it into my laptop. 3 folders appeared instantly. Folder 1, Financial Manipulation. Folder 2, Recorded Conversations. Folder 3, Emergency Instructions. My breath hitched. Emergency instructions. Even the name carried the weight of a woman preparing her husband for a war she knew she wouldn't live to fight. I forced myself to start with the first folder, Financial Manipulation. Inside were screenshots, bank logs, red flag expenditures tied to accounts in Aaron's name, but initiated from devices Brianna controlled. None of it was illegal, but all of it was predatory. Small transfers masked as household costs. Sudden withdrawals labeled as urgent repairs. Credit increases linked to accounts she used more than he did. It was the same pattern as Phoenix, not theft, grooming. Grooming his finances until dependency blended into obedience. Then I opened folder 2, Recorded Conversations. I wasn't ready for what I heard. Margaret's voice weak, frail, breath uneven, saying, "Hold on. I just need to put this here," before placing something down. Then footsteps. Then Brianna's voice. Sweet, calm, poisonous. "He'll sign whatever we put in front of him," she said. "His mind is going. You saw him mix up the dates last week. We just have to show the court he's slipping. Once we get control of the trust, everything else becomes simple." My hands clenched so hard I felt my nails bite into my palm. Another recording. Aaron's voice, tired, wary. "I don't want to make him feel like we're pushing him aside." Then Brianna's reply, soft and manipulative. "This isn't about pushing him aside. It's about protecting him. Your father is fragile, emotionally unstable, grieving. If he's declared incompetent, he won't have to worry anymore. We'll take care of everything." The way she twisted caring into a weapon made bile rise in my throat. A third recording. A whispered conversation. Brianna again. "Once your mother passes, he won't fight. He'll be lost. That's when you make the move. It's the humane thing to do." The audio ended abruptly. I sat frozen, staring at the laptop screen, shaking with a quiet fury I had never experienced before. Not the hot anger of confrontation, not the loud anger of a man who feels insulted. This was a cold, surgical fury, the kind that forms the moment you realize someone has not just wronged you, but strategically planned to dismantle your life piece by piece. And then I opened folder 3, Emergency Instructions. It began with a video. Margaret, sitting in her hospital bed, pale, weak, But her eyes were sharper than I'd seen them in months. "Luther," she said, her voice soft but steady, "if you're watching this, then I need you to listen carefully. You are not alone. You are not helpless. And you are not losing your mind. Everything you suspect is real. Everything you feel is justified. And everything they're planning must be stopped." I felt my throat close. She inhaled shallowly, gathering strength. "I'm leaving you with the tools, the trust, the card, Nora, the investigator's findings, and these recordings. Use them only when the time is right. Not before, not after." Her eyes softened. "I love you, Luther, and I trust you to finish what I no longer can." The video ended, and I sat there unmoving, the house silent around me, the ghost of her voice still echoing through the room she once filled with life. That was when the front door opened. Aaron's voice drifted in casually. "Dad, you home? We need to talk." I closed the laptop slowly, calmly, carefully, and as his footsteps approached, everything inside me settled into a stillness so profound it felt like stepping into the eye of a storm. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't broken. I was ready. If you're ready for part 6, type "finish the job" in the comments, because what happens next is where the mask finally begins to slip, and not mine. Aaron stepped into the living room with the hesitant steps of a man unsure if he was entering a home or a battlefield. And for a moment we simply looked at each other. Two men who shared blood but not the same reality, not anymore. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from living in a life that drains you drip by drip until you barely recognize your own reflection. "Dad," he said, rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to when he was a kid caught lying about homework. "Brianna wants us to come over tonight. She says we need to discuss the future." The future. In his voice, it wasn't a word, it was a warning. I kept my tone neutral, steady. Exactly the way Nora trained me to sound when dealing with someone who doesn't yet realize the truth surrounding them. Like an invisible net. "The future can wait," I said softly. "Sit, Aaron." He hesitated, then dropped onto the couch like a man surrendering to gravity. He looked around the house, Margaret's decorations, her framed photos, the throws she crocheted over long winters, and something flickered in his eyes. Something like grief or longing or awakening. "Dad, I don't know what's happening to me," he murmured. "I don't know what's real anymore." I look at her and I feel trapped. But then she starts crying or telling me I misunderstood, and I feel guilty, like everything is my fault. He rubbed his chest, right over his heart. I feel like I'm losing myself. I didn't reach for him. I didn't try to comfort him yet, because people who've been psychologically manipulated rarely respond to comfort at first. They respond to clarity. "You're not losing yourself," I said. "You're seeing yourself for the first time in years. You're waking up, Aaron. And waking up hurts." He swallowed hard. His eyes glistened. "Dad, Brianna says you've been acting erratic, that you changed the locks because you're paranoid, that you're calling lawyers trying to cut us out. She says you're not thinking straight." His voice cracked. "Dad, is that true?" I held his gaze unwaveringly, letting silence clear the fog between us. Then I said, "Let me ask you something, son. If I were losing my mind, why did your mother leave all her legal power in my hands? Why did she trust me and no one else? Why did she spend 2 years preparing for something she never told you or Brianna about?" Aaron blinked rapidly. His breathing quickened. 2 years? 2 years, I repeated, because she saw something long before either of us did. His jaw tightened. He looked away, then back at me. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Has Brianna ever lied to me?" The question hung there, like a blade, suspended above his own chest, I didn't soften the truth. He wasn't fragile. He was waking up. Aaron, I said quietly, Brianna doesn't lie to you. She lies through you. She manipulates you into believing whatever fits her goal. That's not love. That's control. His face twisted. Pain, denial, hope, fear all tangled together into a man on the edge of a collapse he didn't know would lead to freedom. Dad, I found something. Earlier today, on her computer. His voice dropped to a whisper. She had a draft petition already typed. A guardianship petition against you. She filled in your name, your age, details about you being mentally unstable, and she saved it weeks ago, before Mom even passed. That was the moment the last illusion cracked. It didn't explode dramatically. It cracked the way a thin sheet of ice cracks under the first real weight, quiet but irreversible. I leaned forward. Aaron, listen to me. There is a plan in motion. And you are not just part of it, you were the tool she needed to make it happen. None of this is your fault. But you must choose now who you stand with. His shoulders sagged under a weight he had carried for a decade without knowing it had a name. Dad, he whispered, what do you want me to do? It was the exact question Margaret predicted he would one day ask. She wrote it in the emergency instructions folder. When Aaron asks what he should do, tell him the truth. Tell him he can't save his marriage, but he can save his father. I took a slow breath. I want you to help me protect what your mother built. I want you to listen, to observe, to record, not because I want revenge, but because if we don't act, she will destroy both of us. Son, you are not fighting your wife. You are escaping your captor. The words hit him with visible force. His hand shot to his mouth as if holding in everything he wished someone had told him years earlier. After a long, trembling moment, he nodded. Tell me what to do. And just like that, the tide shifted. Not violently, quietly, precisely, exactly the way Margaret designed it. That night, before he returned home to Brianna, I trained him the way a father trains a son for the hardest job he'll ever do. Not with physical strength, but with awareness, strategy, and purpose. She will sense your fear, I warned him. So, remove the fear, replace it with curiosity. She will try to guilt you. Replace guilt with observation. She will try to isolate you again. Replace isolation with evidence. He wiped his face, exhaled shakily, and said, Dad, I think she suspects something. She keeps asking who I've been talking to. She watches me when I'm texting. She checks the phone logs. That's why, I said. You don't hide. You distract. You let her see what you want her to see. You let her believe you're exactly where she thinks you are emotionally. You let her feel safe. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Good. Because tomorrow, I said, their real plan begins, and when they make their move, we'll be ready. Before he left, he paused at the doorway. Dad, he said softly, did Mom know this moment would come? I smiled sadly. She didn't just know, she planned for it. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and walked out into the night. When the door closed behind him, the house felt different. Not empty, preparing. Like the deep inhale before a storm exhales. I stood there a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of Margaret's house, feeling the shift in the air, the moment a hunted man becomes a prepared man. I whispered, Margaret, we're almost there. And for the first time since she died, I felt something unmistakable, a sense that she was right where she promised she'd be. Beside me, steadying my hand for what came next. If you're ready for part 7, type justice now, because from here on, the trap doesn't just tighten, it snaps. When Aaron left that night, I didn't sleep, but it wasn't the same restless grief that had haunted me after the funeral. This was sharper, more focused. Like my mind had finally remembered it wasn't just a place where loss lived, but a place where plans could be built. I sat at the kitchen table, the USB drive still plugged into my laptop. Margaret's emergency video paused on the screen, her eyes frozen mid-gaze like she was watching over me, waiting to see what I'd do next. I whispered to the empty room, "We're doing it your way." And for the first time since she died, the loneliness didn't feel absolute. In the morning, I called Nora. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been holding the phone waiting for it to vibrate. "He's in," I said. "He believes her?" she asked carefully. "He believes himself," I replied. For the first time in a decade, he's starting to recognize his own thoughts. That's more dangerous to her than anything we have on paper. Nora exhaled, and I could hear the years of waiting in that breath. The years since Victor's death, since the settlement that silenced her, since Brianna walked away without consequence. "Good," she said. "Then it's time to bring in the next person Margaret lined up for you." I frowned. "Another person?" "The lawyer," she said, "the one who built the trust with her." "Miles Turner," she said. "He'd be the one to stitch everything together when the time came." I remembered the name now from the emergency folder and from the note tucked inside the trust. I'd been so consumed by the investigation file and the recordings that I'd barely given myself time to process the existence of an attorney who had quietly helped my wife build a legal fortress around us. I dug through the folder until I found his card. Miles Turner, elder law and estate protection. Margaret had written beside it in blue ink, "You can trust him." That was enough for me. I called his office. The receptionist put me on hold for less than a minute before a calm male voice came on the line. "Mr. Grant," he said, "I've been expecting this call for a long time." That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. We met that afternoon in an office that smelled like paper, coffee, and quiet fights won over years of patience. Miles was in his mid-50s, suit slightly rumpled but eyes sharp behind wire-framed glasses. He shook my hand with the kind of grip that belonged to a man who still believed in doing things the right way, even when the world didn't. "Your wife," he said as we sat, "was one of the smartest clients I've ever had. Most people come to me after the damage is done. She came early, she saw the damage coming, and built the walls before the first hit." He opened a thick binder with our name on it. "The Grant Family Living Trust. Let me explain what she did," he continued. "Right now, on paper, almost nothing belongs directly to you. The house, the investments, the accounts, they're all owned by the trust. And you, Luther, are the trustee. That means you're in control of everything. Brianna has no legal standing. None. She's not a beneficiary. She's not a trustee. She's nothing but your daughter-in-law. And that gives her exactly zero authority over your finances while you're competent. And if they try to say, 'I'm not?'" I asked. "That," he said, sliding a folder across the desk, "is why we had you evaluated by Dr. Carter 2 days ago." I'd nearly forgotten how quickly he'd moved once I called. His office had handled the entire appointment with professional efficiency. "Her report states you show no signs of dementia, cognitive decline, or impaired judgment," Miles continued. "Legally, you are as solid as granite. If Brianna and whoever she's working with files a guardianship or conservatorship petition to take control of your assets, this report will hit that claim like a wrecking ball. And that's before we even introduce the investigation file and the recordings." A strange sensation spread through me, a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. For weeks, Brianna had been counting on an image of me as a confused old man who could be shoved aside with a few signatures and a sad story. She had no idea Margaret had already added steel reinforcement beams under that image. "We're not just defending you," Miles said, his voice sharpening. "We're flipping the board. We're turning this into what it really is, an attempted elder financial exploitation case. And if we play this correctly, we won't just stop them, we'll expose them." For a second, I saw Margaret in my mind, not lying in a hospital bed, but standing in our kitchen years earlier, hands on her hips, saying, "If people come for our family, They better be ready for both of us. She was still fighting, just with different hands now. There's one more factor, I said. Her mother. I told him what Nora had shared, what the Phoenix investigator had uncovered about Evelyn Hale's past, cases in Ohio, how the methods matched Brianna's with Victor, how the pattern repeated like a script learned and rehearsed. Miles listened, jaw tightening. That, he said, turns this from a one-off opportunist into a multi-state pattern. If we get solid proof of her current involvement, prosecutors will be very interested. Juries don't like predators who practice. We're working on that, I said. Aaron is inside. He's going to record everything he can. They think he's still asleep. They don't realize he's awake now. Good, Miles replied, because if your son can capture conversations where they talk about you as a target, their plans to have you declared incompetent. Any mention of moving money, leaving the country, or protecting you by taking control of your assets, that will make this whole case impossible for a judge to ignore. When I left his office, I wasn't just a widower trying to survive one of the worst seasons of his life. I was a man with a lawyer, a neighbor, an investigator's file, recorded evidence, and a plan my wife began writing long before her last breath. Now all we needed was timing, and patience. That night, Aaron called. Not from the car, not from the office, from the bathroom, with the fan running and the water slightly on so the sound covered his voice. Dad, he whispered, they're planning something for next week. She thinks you're vulnerable. She thinks you don't know about the trust. She keeps saying, once we have control of his finances, like it's already decided. Is her mother there? I asked. Almost every day, he replied, and I could hear the exhaustion and disgust mixing in his voice. They sit at the dining table with files and laptops like it's some corporate strategy session. They think I'm an idiot. They talk about me like I'm a weak link, like I'm just the bridge they use to get to you. That sentence burned. My son had to listen to his own wife and mother-in-law talk about him as a tool, not a person. Are you recording? I asked softly. Every chance I get, he said. I got something today. They were talking about you, about filing something in court, some kind of emergency petition. They said if they get it granted, you'll be legally declawed. Those were their words, declawed. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears, steady but heavier. Send it to me, I said. And Aaron, remember this. Every word they say now, every conversation they have while they think you're still asleep, that's their rope. You're not just listening. You're handing them the rope they're going to hang their own plan with. There was a pause, then a shaky laugh that sounded half like my son at 12 and half like a man finally seeing the cage he'd been living in for 10 years. You sound like Mom, he said. Good, I answered, because this is her fight too. When we hung up, I transferred the new recording to my laptop and listened. Brianna's voice, bright and clinical. Judges don't like chaos. Old men who change their locks and hire lawyers right after their wives die look unstable. We lean on that. We lean on the grief narrative, the confusion, the paranoia. We get the doctor to sign the report. We show the judge. He's acting irrational. And boom, guardianship granted. He loses control. We gain it. Simple. Then Evelyn's voice, calm and experienced, like a teacher correcting a student while praising her progress. You're thinking clearly, she said. Don't back off when he gets emotional. Emotional outbursts help you. They make him look unstable. Your power is in your calm. Let him look angry. You look concerned. Listening to them talk about me like a wild animal they were planning to tranquilize would have shattered me a few weeks ago. Now it only sharpened my resolve. I saved the file in a new folder Miles had me create. Evidence. Active conspiracy. It was getting full, and they had no idea. If you're still here with me, type type I'm not leaving in the comments, because the next move they made, the one they thought would finish me, was the exact move that would drag them into a courtroom they couldn't talk their way out of. The day everything shifted didn't announce itself with thunder or warning. It crept in quietly, disguised as any other Texas morning, with sunlight breaking through the blinds and a stillness in the house that felt almost unnatural. I woke up with the sense that something was moving toward me, something I had been preparing for without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Margaret used to say, "The devil doesn't knock. He lets himself in." And that morning, I understood her fully. My phone buzzed just after 9 a.m. It was Aaron. His voice was tense, too steady to be natural. "Dad, they're filing it today," he said. "The guardianship petition. They're going to court this afternoon. They think it'll be uncontested." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, not from fear, but from the weight of inevitability. "Who's going?" I asked. Her mother, and Derek," he whispered. "I told them I have work." They didn't question it. That alone said everything about how little they valued him outside of what he could give them. "Good," I said. "Stay away from them today. Don't draw attention. Don't argue, just watch." There was a pause. "Dad?" She's confident. Too confident. Like she already knows the judge will side with her. I closed my eyes. That's because she believes she's smarter than everyone else in the room. That arrogance is our weapon. After the call, I went to the kitchen and made coffee just as Margaret used to, 2 scoops. 1 slow stir. No sugar. I drank it while looking out the window toward Nora's house. The blinds shifted once. She was watching, waiting, ready. By noon, I was in Miles Turner's office, the thick trust binder open on the table, the evidence folder beside it, the recordings queued on his laptop. Nora joined us minutes later, her expression composed, but the kind of composed that comes from choosing steadiness over rage. "We're ready?" she asked quietly. "We're ready," Miles affirmed. They're walking into a courtroom expecting a confused widower. Instead, they're getting a coordinated response built over 2 years by your wife. "Today is the day you reclaim your life, Luther." I nodded, feeling something inside me lock into place like a final puzzle piece sliding into position. "What's the strategy?" I asked. "Simple," Miles replied. "We let them speak first. We let them lie. We let them present their fraudulent documentation. The doctor's report, the claims of instability, the fabricated concerns. The judge will think this is a standard guardianship case. Then," he tapped the binder, "we drop the truth." "All of it?" Nora asked. "Every page," Miles answered. "Victor Reyes, the settlement, the Phoenix investigation, the Ohio case, the recordings, the trust, elder exploitation statutes, their plan to flee the country, their affair, their banking history, their manipulation of Aaron." He paused. "We aren't just defending Luther. We are prosecuting them in a courtroom not built for their kind of deception." A chill ran through me, not fear, but awe. This wasn't vengeance. This was justice with structure, justice with teeth. Justice sharpened by the hands of the woman who had loved me more fiercely than I realized when she was alive. At 1 o'clock, we left Turner's office together. A small army, built from loss and truth. The courthouse loomed like a silent witness to the moment that would define the rest of my life. Inside, the air smelled of old carpet and quiet tension. We took our seats. I didn't look toward the petitioner's table yet. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of Brianna's confidence radiating across the room, like a spotlight she mistakenly believed was meant for her. When I finally looked, she was sitting with her ankles crossed and her hands folded neatly in her lap, her navy dress pristine, her expression that perfect blend of sorrow and righteous concern. Evelyn sat beside her, calm and polished, the seasoned puppeteer, disguised as a caring mother. But Derek, he looked different. nervous, edgy, the kind of man who knew enough law to sense when the wind had shifted, but not enough morality to save himself. I leaned back and waited. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat again. The proceedings began. Derek spoke first, as they'd planned, projecting calm professionalism with a voice that carried false sympathy. He painted a picture of me as a grieving, unstable man incapable of handling finances. He cited the fraudulent doctor's report. He described me as vulnerable, confused, prone to paranoia. He framed Brianna as the faithful daughter-in-law, trying to protect the remnants of a family shattered by loss. He invoked Margaret's death as if it were a tool in his argument, a manipulation so vile I felt my jaw tighten. But I didn't speak. Not yet. He presented the petition. He submitted the signed report from their physician. He detailed my supposed erratic behavior. He played the role with expert precision. And when he finished, Brianna dabbed her eyes as if rehearsing for an Oscars ceremony. The judge turned to our table. "Mr. Turner," she said, "your response?" Miles rose calmly, adjusted his glasses, and delivered the kind of opening that shifts the entire energy of a room. "Your Honor," he began, "what the petitioners have submitted is not a guardianship case. It is a conspiracy case disguised as one." The silence that followed was thick, electric, dangerous. "We will present evidence," he continued, "that not only disproves every claim made here today but reveals an ongoing effort to exploit, deceive, and financially devastate Mr. Payne Grant." He held up the fraudulent doctor's report. "Let's begin with this document." And just like that, the battlefield changed. Now, imagine all of this unfolding while Brianna's perfect posture slowly stiffened, while the color drained from her face, while Evelyn's breathing sharpened, while Derek's eyes flicked nervously from evidence to judge to door like a man calculating escape routes. But the real shift came when the judge said, "Proceed," and Miles laid out the first piece of evidence, the flawless, unshakable cognitive evaluation from Dr. Carter. The judge read it. Her expression hardened. The fraudulent report crumbled. The footing beneath Brianna's petition vanished. Then Miles moved on. "Your Honor, to understand the intent behind this petition, we must go back 5 years to the death of a man named Victor Reyes." Brianna exhaled sharply, the first crack in her facade. And Miles continued, "The Phoenix investigation, the financial transfers, the pattern of isolation, the settlement under NDA, the matching behavior with Evelyn in Ohio." Nora's testimony was next, and her voice was steady even when her grief trembled at the edges. The judge listened, really listened. The courtroom was so silent, I could hear the faint buzz of overhead lights. And then, it was time. "Your Honor," Miles said, "we now present recorded conversations gathered legally under Texas one-party consent law. These recordings capture the petitioner's true intentions." The first audio clip played. Brianna's voice filled the courtroom, talking casually about making me look unstable. The judge's eyes narrowed. The second clip played Evelyn, instructing her daughter how to manipulate courtroom perception. A murmur ran through the courtroom. And then the clip Miles saved for last began, the one where Brianna discussed liquidating my assets, fleeing the country, divorcing Aaron, starting a new life with Derek, and leaving me legally destroyed. That was when everything changed. The judge's expression transformed into something cold and resolute. Derek sank into his chair. Evelyn's lips tightened, and Brianna, my daughter-in-law, sat absolutely still, like a statue made from her own arrogance. When the recording ended, the judge looked at them with the kind of steady fury only the law can wield. "I have heard enough," she said, and in that moment, I felt Margaret beside me. As real as breath, as present as sunlight, as triumphant as justice itself, moving through the room she prepared for, long before any of us understood why. If you're ready for part 9, type "Bring the hammer," because this is where the courtroom erupts, and everything they built finally collapses. The courtroom shifted the moment the last recording ended. Not with noise, but with an eerie, suffocating stillness. The kind that settles right before a dam breaks and sweeps everything in its path away. The judge didn't speak at first. She simply stared at the petitioner's table, her gaze fixed on Brianna the way a surgeon studies a malignant tumor before cutting. Brianna sat frozen, lips parted slightly, eyes wide but refusing to blink, as if blinking would make the reality in front of her solidify into something she could no longer deny. Evelyn's mask slipped second, just a flicker, a tightening of the muscles around her mouth, the kind of involuntary reaction that reveals a predator recognizing the moment the trap has snapped shut around her legs. Derek looked like a man who wanted to melt into his own suit jacket, shoulders hunched, fingers twitching in small nervous spasms, as if searching for a briefcase to hide behind. But the silence didn't break until the judge finally leaned forward, hands clasped atop the bench. Her voice came out calm, steady, controlled, the kind of calm that precedes ruin. "Mrs. Grant," she said slowly, "would you like to explain the recordings we just heard?" That was the moment Brianna cracked. She didn't stand. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't even try to adopt her usual soft-spoken, gentle hummingbird persona. She exploded. "Those recordings are fake!" she yelled, jumping to her feet so suddenly her chair screeched across the floor. "This is a setup! He set me up!" She pointed across the courtroom directly at me, her finger trembling with rage. "He and that old neighbor witch and that pathetic excuse of a son, they're all lying. All of them." Gasps rippled through the gallery seats. But no one was more stunned by her reaction than Derek, whose eyes widened as if watching his entire career detonate in real time. Evelyn grabbed Brianna's wrist, hissing under her breath, "Sit down." But it only inflamed her further. "No!" she screamed. "You told me this would work. You told me judges were stupid. You said he'd lose everything and we'd be in Costa Rica by Christmas." Derek choked out, "Brianna, stop talking." "Too late." The judge banged her gavel once. "Mrs. Grant," she said sharply, "you will sit down immediately or be removed from this courtroom." Brianna sat only because two bailiffs had already stepped forward, but her chest heaved like a cornered animal's, and her glare shifted to Aaron with a hatred so raw the room could feel its heat. "You recorded me," she spat. "You little rat. After everything I did for you, I gave you a life." Aaron didn't flinch. For the first time in years, my son didn't shrink, didn't apologize, didn't fold under her voice. He looked straight at her with a steady calm I'd never seen in him before. "No," he said simply. "You took my life." The judge lifted her hand for silence and turned back to Miles. "Counselor Turner," she said, "do you have any additional evidence before I rule?" Miles stepped forward with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing the truth is a mountain behind you, immovable, undeniable, unshakable. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "One final item." He reached into his file and retrieved the printed transcript of the Phoenix private investigator's report, the one Margaret had guarded for years. This document details the previous victim of Mrs. Grant's exploitation and the resulting settlement sealed by non-disclosure. We are submitting it into the record to establish a long-term pattern of predatory behavior toward elderly widowers. The judge skimmed the first page, her eyes narrowing. "This will be accepted," she said firmly, "under judicial review of character pattern relevancy." I watched as Brianna sunk lower into her seat, her entire body folding into itself. The facade she had spent years constructing collapsing plank by plank. Her mother placed a stiff hand on her shoulder, but there was no comfort in the gesture. It was the grip of someone realizing her entire lineage of deception was coming to an end. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Grant," she said, her tone shifting into something surprisingly gentle. "Is there anything you would like to say to the court?" Every eye in the courtroom shifted to me, Aaron's filled with regret and hope, Nora's steady with solidarity, Miles's calm with assurance, the gallery curious, the petitioners venomous. I rose slowly. Not because of age, but because the moment demanded deliberation. Margaret always said that dignity is the last thing a person can take from you, unless you give it away freely. I wasn't giving anything away. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. My wife Margaret saw this coming long before I did. She spent 2 years preparing for this day. She did it because she knew what kind of woman my daughter-in-law had become. She did it because she knew I loved my family too much to see the danger clearly. I turned for a brief second toward Aaron, who blinked hard, his jaw trembling. But this case, I continued, is not about revenge. It's not even about money. It's about truth. It's about the people who think grief makes a man weak. It's about predators who hide behind the mask of family, hoping no one will look closely enough to see the teeth. The judge nodded once, so I went on. I'm not confused. I'm not incompetent. I'm not paranoid. I'm grieving. And grief doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you clear. I sat down, and the room exhaled. It was over. Everyone knew it. Everyone except Brianna, because she rose again. One last desperate attempt to claw her way back into control. "This is all a lie," she screamed. "He's doing this because he hates me, because Margaret hated me." Her mother tried to calm her, but she shook her arm free violently. "No, I won't let this happen again. Not like Phoenix, not like Ohio." It was the closest she had ever come to confessing aloud. The judge didn't even need the gavel this time. She raised her hand slightly, and 2 bailiffs stepped forward in silent synchrony. "Mrs. Grant," the judge said, voice icy, "you are ordered to be taken into custody pending formal charges of conspiracy to commit elder exploitation, attempted fraud, and perjury." Brianna's scream wasn't a word. It was the sound of a world collapsing, the sound of a predator being dragged out into the open where her teeth were no longer an advantage. Evelyn rose too, but the bailiff intercepted her. "Mrs. Hale," the judge said, "you are also remanded into custody. Your involvement is clear from the evidence and from your own statements." Derek didn't even argue. He simply lowered his head and placed his hands behind his back before the bailiffs reached him. Defeated. Done. Finished. They led the 3 of them out in cuffs. Brianna screaming threats that no longer held weight. Evelyn silent but seething. Derek pale and sweating. And when the doors closed behind them, something inside me, something old and bruised, finally loosened its grip. The judge turned to Miles. "Mr. Turner," she said, "the petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this court will be forwarding the entire record to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution." She paused, then raised her eyes to meet mine. "Mr. Grant, you are free to go." Free to go. The words hit me harder than any blow I'd felt in the last 6 months. Margaret had saved me. Aaron had returned to me. Nora had stood beside me. And justice had landed with the full weight of truth behind it. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as we left, some shocked, some sympathetic, some simply amazed by the spectacle. But Miles, Nora, and Aaron walked on either side of me, a small circle carved from the chaos. A reminder that family is not defined by blood alone, but by who stands with you when the wolves come. And as we stepped out into the sunlight, I looked upward for a brief moment, imagining Margaret's voice and the warmth on my face. "See?" she whispered in memory. "You did it. If you want part 10, type finish them, because the final chapter isn't about the courtroom, it's about the aftermath, the healing, the letter Margaret left behind, and the last secret she never got to reveal." When the courthouse doors shut behind us, the world didn't erupt in applause or celebration. It simply kept moving, as if nothing monumental had just happened inside that building. People crossed the streets, cars honked in the distance, The air smelled faintly of gasoline and warm pavement, but inside me, something tectonic had shifted. For months, maybe years, I had been living in a fog I didn't recognize, because it rolled in slowly, day by day. But now, standing in the afternoon sun with my son beside me and Nora at my shoulder, the fog lifted in a single sweep, revealing a landscape I had forgotten existed. Aaron stood silently for a long time, his hands shaking, not out of fear, but out of freedom, the kind of shaking a person does when the weight on their back has been quietly crushing them for so long, they only notice its absence when it finally disappears. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking under the strain of a decade he couldn't reclaim. "I'm so sorry. I didn't let him spiral. I didn't let him drown in a guilt he didn't deserve." I placed a hand on his shoulder, firm. "Son," I said quietly, "you don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself forgiveness." His face collapsed for a moment, grief and relief tangling together in a way that almost broke me. But then he nodded, wiped his eyes, and stood taller than I'd ever seen him stand. This was the son Margaret knew he could become, a man who could finally breathe without permission. Miles walked us to the parking lot and handed me a folder, thin, simple, beige. "There's nothing more they can do to you," he said, "but there's something you should know. The DA will be filing charges within 72 hours. You won't need to testify unless you choose to. This is now in the hands of the state." I nodded. Relief wasn't a wave. It was a slow, steady warmth that started somewhere deep and traveled outward in quiet pulses. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." Miles gave a small, respectful nod, the kind men give when they've fought side by side in a war, and know no words can fully articulate what that means. "Your wife built the shield," he said. "You just learned how to hold it." And with that, he left. Nora walked me and Aaron to my car, though she didn't need to. She did it because she wanted to, because some people show you what love looks like without using the word. At the car door, she hesitated. "There's something I think you should read today," she said. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a small white envelope, worn at the corners, sealed with a faded blue sticker. "Margaret gave me this 3 months before she passed," she said. "Give it to him when the hard part is over." My breath caught. I looked at the envelope like it was something fragile enough to crumble in my hands. "She wrote to me?" I whispered. "She wrote for you," Nora corrected gently, "for the man she knew you were, and the man she trusted you'd become." She squeezed my arm and walked away, leaving me with a silence filled by memories of the woman who had built the battleground I just survived. Aaron got into his own car and said he was heading home to pack up what was left of his things. He told me he didn't want to spend one more night in that house. He told me he didn't fear Brianna anymore. He told me he felt alive. And then he hugged me, really hugged me for the first time in years. When I pulled into my driveway, the house felt different. Not haunted, not empty, waiting. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had opened Margaret's folder, the same place where the truth first cut through the fog. The envelope sat in front of me, weightless but heavy in meaning. I opened it with hands that shook not from fear, but from reverence. Her handwriting covered the first page, steady, careful, the way she always wrote when she wanted me to understand something deeply. "My love," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then the storm has passed, and I know you. You are sitting at the table with your jaw clenched, your heart racing, and your mind wondering whether you did enough. So let me answer that for you. Yes, you did." My throat tightened. I knew the day would come when the truth would surface. She wrote, "I knew you would question yourself, blame yourself, carry weight that didn't belong to you, but you must understand something. You are the strongest man I have ever known, not because you never break, but because you rebuild every time you shatter. Tears blurred the ink as I kept reading. I didn't tell you everything. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to live without fear. I wanted to protect the parts of you that the world has tried to dull: your kindness, your loyalty, your heart. I knew if you saw the danger too soon, you'd run to the fire instead of preparing to put it out. I exhaled, trembling. By the time you read this, you will have faced lies, betrayal, manipulation, and fear. But you will also have rediscovered courage you thought you'd misplaced. You will have seen our son stand again. And you will have learned that you were never alone. Even now, you aren't. The next line hit so hard I had to close my eyes just to breathe. I didn't leave you behind, Luther. I walked ahead to clear the path. The letter continued. Nora is part of your life for a reason. Not the reason you might think, and not the reason others might assume. She is there to remind you that love does not end in the ground. It continues in friendships, in allies, in those who show up when darkness is thickest. Trust her. Let her help you remember the world is still warm. I hadn't realized how tightly my hands were gripping the paper until I forced myself to relax them. As for Aaron, she wrote, forgive him before he asks. He was not weak. He was wounded. And people who are wounded cling to the wrong healers until they remember how to stand. Be proud of him. He is finding his way back. The final paragraph, that was the one that undid me completely. And finally, my love, be gentle with yourself. Build again, grow again, laugh again. And when you feel lonely, sit at this table and imagine my hand over yours. I will always be there. Just not in the way you're used to. Love doesn't disappear. It changes shape. The signature at the bottom, her name, written with that gentle little curl on the G, was the closest thing to hearing her voice again. I set the letter down and let the quiet of the house fill me, not with grief, with gratitude, with release, with peace. Later that night, Aaron came over with 2 suitcases, a duffel bag, and a look on his face that was equal parts exhaustion and rebirth. We sat on the back porch, drank iced tea, watched the sky turn the color of fading embers. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. For the first time in years, silence between us felt like connection instead of distance. When he went to bed, I stayed outside. The breeze moved through the yard the way Margaret used to move through the house, soft, intentional, guiding. I looked up at the sky and whispered, the hard part is over. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt a warmth on my shoulder, as if someone had rested a hand there, gently, proudly, lovingly. Then the breeze shifted. The night deepened. Life went on, and I finally let it.